There is a shape. 7 rings, folded one inside the other. A single, unbroken path that winds to a center and back out again. No branches, no wrong turns, no dead ends. You cannot get lost inside it because there is only ever one way to go. Whatever you do, the path decides where you end up. That shape was pressed into a clay tablet in Bronze Age Greece more than 3,000 years ago. It was laid into the stone floor of a French cathedral in the year 1220. It was carved into rock on the cold shores of the Baltic Sea. It was woven into a basket in the Arizona desert, and it was set out in stone in the dead center of the Australian outback. The same figure, the same 7 turns, the same geometry. Now look at these two side by side. On the left, a basket made by the Tohono O'odham people of the American Southwest. On the right, a silver coin struck in Crete on the far side of the world 2,500 years earlier. They are the same drawing. These cultures never met, they never traded, they shared no language, no religion, no coastline, no ancestor. They were separated by oceans and by thousands of years. And somehow, they drew the same thing. This is one of the strangest patterns in human history, and by the end, you will have the answer to why it exists, or the closest thing to an answer that anyone has. Because the explanation may not be hidden in the past at all. It may be hidden inside your own skull. To understand the shape, you have to start where its name was born, on the island of Crete. The story is one of the oldest in the Western world. King Minos ruled Crete, and beneath his palace he kept a monster, the Minotaur, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull. To cage it, Minos commissioned the greatest craftsman of the age, an inventor named Daedalus. And Daedalus built him a structure so cunning, so full of winding corridors and false turns, that anything placed inside it could never find its way out. He called it the Labyrinth. Minos fed the monster with tribute. Every 9 years, the city of Athens was forced to send 14 of its own children, 7 young men and 7 young women, to be released into the labyrinth and devoured in the dark. Then, a prince of Athens decided the cycle had to end. His name was Theseus, and he volunteered to be one of the 14. He sailed to Crete intending to walk into the labyrinth and kill the thing inside it. And when he arrived, the king's own daughter fell in love with him. Her name was Ariadne. She could not bear to watch him die. So in secret she went to Daedalus, the man who had built the maze, and she asked him how anyone could survive it. And Daedalus told her the answer was almost insultingly simple. Give him a ball of thread. Ariadne gave Theseus the thread with a single instruction. Tie one end to the doorpost, unwind it as you walk, follow it into the darkness, kill the monster, and then follow the thread back into the light. He did exactly that. He killed the Minotaur, he followed the thread out, and he sailed away with Ariadne. It is the most famous labyrinth story ever told. And it contains a problem that almost no one notices. Here is the problem. The labyrinth in the myth is a place where you get lost. It has to be. That is the entire point. The corridors twist and split, the dead ends trap you, the monster hides in the confusion. Without Ariadne's thread, Theseus would have wandered until he starved. The danger of the story is the danger of getting lost. But that is not what a labyrinth actually is. When the people of Crete put the labyrinth on their coins, they did not engrave a maze. They engraved that single, unbroken winding line, the 7 rings, the one continuous path, the one entrance that leads inevitably to the center and back out again. No branches, no choices, no dead ends. And that is the contradiction. In a true labyrinth, you cannot get lost. There is only one path. You could walk it with your eyes closed. The monster could not hide from you, because there is nowhere to hide. Every step is forced. Ariadne's thread, the most famous object in the entire legend, is completely unnecessary. You would never need it. The myth describes a maze. The symbol shows a labyrinth, and the two are not the same thing. This is the first crack in the story. The shape and the legend do not fit together, which raises a question the legend can't answer. If the symbol isn't really about the Minotaur, then where did it actually come from? We call it the Cretan Labyrinth. Scholars call it the Cretan Labyrinth. It is named for Crete, for Knossos, for Minos and his monster. There is just one problem. It does not appear in Crete. Not at the start. The oldest securely dated example of this exact seven-circuit design was not found in Crete at all. It was found on the Greek mainland, scratched onto the back of a clay tablet at the palace of Nestor in Pylos. That tablet dates to around 1180 before Christ, and it only survived because the palace burned down and the fire baked the clay hard. A scribe doodled the labyrinth on the back of an accounting record, and an accident of fire preserved it for 3,000 years. In Crete itself, the symbol does not show up until the 4th century before Christ, on those coins of Knossos, struck nearly 1,000 years after the Pylos tablet. The place that gave the labyrinth its name is one of the last places it appears. And the design may be older still. Clay tablets from Babylon, 2,000 years before Christ, carry the oldest labyrinth illustrations of any kind, though of a different pattern. The man who has spent half a century mapping these origins, Jeff Saward, founder of the journal Kerdroya, the closest thing the field has to a world authority, is blunt about the label. The classical labyrinth predates its arrival in Crete. The name is a misnomer, an echo of a myth, not a record of where the shape was born. So the symbol is older than the story we tell about it. It was already traveling the ancient world before a single coin was ever struck in Knossos. It moved farther than any Greek sailor ever did. The question is how far, and the answer is going to take us somewhere the myth could never reach.
Leave the Mediterranean. Leave the warm coins and the painted myths. Go north, far north, to the wind-swept coastlines of Sweden, Finland, and the Baltic Sea. Here, the labyrinth is not painted or carved. It is built, laid out flat on the ground in lines of stones, ring after concentric ring, often right at the edge of the water where the land meets the sea. And there are not a handful of them. There are hundreds, possibly once thousands. Across Scandinavia and the Baltic states, these stone labyrinths cluster by the coast in numbers found nowhere else on Earth. In Sweden alone, around 300 historical stone labyrinths still survive today. Most were laid down between the 13th and the 17th centuries, though some may be far older. In the north, they have a name of their own, Troy Town, Trojaborg. You might assume that points back to the city of Troy, to Homer, to the walls of Ilium. But in the Nordic reading, the name has nothing to do with the Trojan War. It comes from an old word that means to turn, to twist, to wind. A Troy town is not a town from a Greek epic. It is a place of turning. The shape named itself after what it does. There is a competing thread. The Welsh Cardroia can be read as City of Troy or Castle of Turns, and both readings have survived side by side. But in the north, the meaning that stuck was simply the winding place. The same seven-ring figure from the Cretan coins, now built in cold stone on the far edge of Europe by people who never saw a Mediterranean palace. What were they for? In the fishing communities of the Baltic, the stone labyrinths were not decoration, and they were not games. They were instruments, tools for managing the unseen. When the weather turned bad and the sea looked dangerous, the fishermen would walk the labyrinth before they set out. They would follow the winding path all the way to the center, and the belief was that the malevolent spirits clinging to them, the ones who brought storms and bad luck, the ones they called the smågubbar, the little men, would be drawn in along the path behind them. Trapped at the center by the one road in, then the fisherman would step out, run from the labyrinth, and race to his boat and push off, leaving the spirits stranded in the stone, unable to follow,
while he sailed to safety on a sea suddenly emptied of bad luck. There were other rites woven into the same stones. The Jungfrudans, the dance of the maiden, where a young woman stood at the center while the young men raced the path to reach her first. And among the Sámi, the herding people of the Arctic, the labyrinths served as protection against wolves and wolverines stalking the herds and against disorders of the mind. Look at what just happened. In Crete, the labyrinth was a prison for a monster. Here in the Arctic, it is a trap for spirits and a shield for the mind. Different monsters, different centuries, but the same instinct exactly, that the winding path holds something dangerous at its heart, and that walking it does something the straight road cannot. Step back and look at the distance we have just crossed. He started in the Bronze Age palaces of the Eastern Mediterranean. Sun, marble, painted bulls. We have ended on the frozen edge of the Arctic Circle. Salt wind, grey stone, fishermen and reindeer herders. Two climates that could not be more opposite. Two worlds with no shared language, no shared religion, no shared gods. And the figure on the ground is the same continuous line, the same single path that cannot branch, the same inevitable journey to the center and back. If this were the whole story, you could still reach for an explanation. Europe is connected. Trade moved along its rivers and coasts for thousands of years. Ideas traveled with amber and furs and tin. A symbol can ride a trade route from a Greek island to a Swedish shore over the course of centuries. It strains the imagination, but it does not break it. You can still draw a line on the map from Crete to the Baltic and tell yourself the pattern simply traveled along it. So hold that explanation in your mind. The labyrinth spread like a story from one connected place to the next. Now we are going to cross an ocean, and on the other side, that line on the map runs out of road. In the Sonoran Desert of central Arizona live the Tohono O'odham, the desert people. And in their tradition, there is an image so important, it appears woven into their baskets, etched into silver, carried as a symbol of who they are. They call it the man in the maze. At the top of the figure stands a single human form, poised at the entrance to a winding path. And the path itself is a labyrinth, 7 concentric circuits, growing out of the same simple cross-shaped seed that the classical design grows from. The same 7 rings, the same one road in. The figure at the entrance is I'itoi, the elder brother, the creator, the one who in their stories emerged from the swirling edges of the earth itself. And the path is a life. Each turn of the labyrinth is a choice, a hardship, a passage of a human life. The figure begins at the top, that is, birth, and walks the winding road inward through everything a life contains. The center is death, and in the very last turn, just before reaching the center, the O'odham say a person is given one final moment to look back over everything they have lived before passing through to whatever comes next. It survives most strongly in basketry from the 19th century and occasionally in Hopi silver. It is one of the most recognizable Native American symbols in the world, and it should not exist. Put them next to each other, just look. On the left, the men in the maze, woven into an autumn basket in the Arizona desert. On the right, the labyrinth from a coin of Knossos, struck in the Mediterranean. Lay one over the other and trace the lines. Same number of circuits, same turning pattern. The path doubles back in the same sequence, ring to ring, in the same order. Same seed at the heart of the construction. To the eye, they are not similar. They are the same drawing. Now measure the gap between them. 10,000 kilometers of open ocean, around 2,500 years of time. And this is the part that matters. No known route between them. No trade road. No migration with a date and a path. No cultural bridge. No shared ancestor close enough to carry a symbol across that void. In Europe, you could draw the line on the map and let the labyrinth travel along it. Here, there is no line to draw. The ocean is in the way, the centuries are in the way, and there is no mechanism, no ship, no trader, no missionary that anyone can point to and say, this is how the drawing crossed. There is no contact in the archaeological record, none. The two peoples are not distant cousins who drifted apart carrying a shared symbol. They are strangers who never knew the other existed. And yet, here it is, the same impossible figure in the desert on the other side of the planet. This is where the simplest explanation, that the labyrinth was invented once and spread, runs straight into a wall. Hold on to that. We will come back to the wall.
Because it is not only the shapes that cross the ocean. Look at what the shape means. To the Tohono O'odham, the labyrinth is the winding path of a single human life. Birth at the threshold, death at the center, every turn a passage you must walk through. It is a map of a life lived one inevitable step at a time. Now, hold that beside two other cultures we are about to meet. In a French cathedral, medieval Christians will walk the very same kind of path as a journey of the soul toward God, the earth, struggle, and arrival. And on the Arctic tundra, the Sámi will read the winding road as a passage that orders and protects the mind. 3 peoples, 3 continents, no contact. And the meaning lands in almost the same place every time. The single winding road is a life. The center is the end of it. To walk it is to rehearse the whole journey. That is the part that should stop you cold. 2 cultures inventing the same geometry by accident is a strange coincidence. But 2 cultures inventing the same geometry and then loading it with the same meaning, the path as a human life, is something else entirely. The shape converges, and the meaning converges right behind it. The diffusion explanation has no mechanism for the shape. It has even less of a mechanism for the meaning. So, if the drawing didn't travel, then what did? Keep that question open. We're about to make it much harder to answer. Come back to the connected world for a moment, to Rome. Because Rome shows us something new about the Labyrinth. Not where it traveled, what it was for. Archaeologists have catalogued around 57 labyrinth mosaics across the Roman Empire, in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. The oldest of them is in the ruins of Pompeii, in a house we now simply call the House of the Labyrinth, with a mosaic of Theseus and the Minotaur set at the very center of the design. The Romans took the Greek shape, squared it into 4 neat quadrants, but kept it unicursal, kept the single unbroken path. And here is the detail that matters. These mosaics are not found in temples. They are not in the great public buildings. They turn up again and again in private homes and in bathhouses, and very often laid into the floor right at the entrance, at the threshold, the doorway. Because the Romans believed the labyrinth had power, apotropaic power, the power to turn away evil. You set the winding path at your door, and any malevolent force trying to enter would be caught in its turns, snared at the boundary, unable to cross into the home. The logic is almost mechanical. Evil follows you in a straight line. The labyrinth gives it no straight line to follow. It has to take the long way, the same as everyone else, and somewhere in those turns, it loses you. Stop on that idea. The labyrinth as a guardian of the threshold, a thing you place at the edge of inside and outside to keep harm from crossing over. Remember the Baltic fishermen trapping their spirits in the stone? It is the same instinct in a Roman doorway. And now watch what happens when we travel 5,000 kilometers east. In Tamil Nadu, in the south of India, there is a tradition that is still alive this morning. Before dawn, women kneel at the entrances of their homes and draw on the ground with rice powder, with chalk, with colored flour. The art is called kolam. Many kolam begin as a grid of dots. Around those dots, the artist loops a single continuous line, curving, doubling, weaving, until the dots are caged inside a flowing pattern. And as the designs grow more complex, that single line winds into something unmistakably labyrinthine, one unbroken path folding through itself. The mathematics underneath them is genuinely sophisticated. Column designs have been studied for their use of Fibonacci-like sequences, for symmetry and periodicity and recursion. But strip the math away, and the essence is the labyrinth's own essence, a single continuous line creating a winding path. And where is it drawn? At the threshold, at the doorway, on the boundary between the inside of the home and the world outside, between the sacred and the profane. Which is exactly what the Roman did with the mosaic at his door, a guardian of the threshold drawn as a single winding line. Same form, same function, 5,000 kilometers apart, with no record of the two traditions ever meeting. The Roman laid it in stone, and the Tamil woman draws it in rice powder, and they are doing the same thing for the same reason at the same place, the edge of the home. Now go as far from everything as it is possible to go. The interior of Australia. The Aboriginal Australians are, by many measures, the most isolated human population in history, tens of thousands of years on a single continent, cut off from the rest of the world for almost the entire span of human civilization elsewhere. And across that continent, they left vast stone arrangements, circles, animal forms, boomerangs, and rows of stones laid out on the ground. At a place called Lake Wongan, one such work consisted of long rows of large stones forming passages that an early account described as running up and down like a maze at the foot of a hill. These arrangements are tied to initiation rites and possibly to watching the sky. Their age is genuinely hard to pin down. Some may be thousands of years old. Now, I want to be careful here because this is where certainty thins out. The attribution of these works to Aboriginal Australians is, in the words of the record, well authenticated and beyond doubt. But reading the Lake Wongan Rose as a true classical seven-circuit labyrinth is the disputed part. The source describes maze-like passages, not the specific, unbroken, unicursal design. So take it not as proof, but as the most suggestive parallel of all. On the most isolated landmass on Earth, by the people most cut off from every culture we have visited, the same instinct appears in stone. The winding ceremonial passage walked at a moment of transformation. If even Australia belongs in this story, then the line on the map is not just broken. There was never a line at all, which forces the question we have been circling since the very first frame. If it didn't travel, how is it everywhere? To find the beginning of an answer, come back to Europe one last time, to the most beautiful labyrinth ever built, the Cathedral of Chartres in France. Between 1215 and 1221, the builders of Chartres set into the stone floor of the nave a labyrinth nearly 13 meters across, the largest church labyrinth of the Middle Ages ever made. It is not the classical 7 circuits, it has 11. But it is a direct descendant of the same tradition, and it is still fundamentally unicursal, one single path, winding all the way to the center and back. No choices, no dead ends. And the builders did something with it that was not decoration. It was geometry, sacred, deliberate geometry. High on the western wall of the cathedral is the great west rose window. And if you could unhinge that rose window at the base of the wall and fold it flat down onto the floor, it would cover the labyrinth almost exactly. The window in the sky and the path on the ground are the same size, the same design, mirror images of one another. Heaven above and the journey below, built to match. The labyrinth had a purpose too. They called the path the Chemin de Jérusalem, the road to Jerusalem. The great act of medieval faith was pilgrimage to the Holy Land. But most people could never make that journey. Too far, too dangerous, too poor. So for them, Walking the winding path of the cathedral labyrinth on their knees became the final stage of pilgrimage. You walked to Jerusalem without ever leaving France. There it is again. The single winding road, walked as the journey of a life toward its sacred end. The exact reading that Tohono O'odham gave it, 10,000 kilometers away.
And the path at Chartres was not only walked, it was danced. In the medieval ritual, on the holiest day of the year, the most senior clergy would gather in the nave at Easter. The eldest of them would step onto the labyrinth and tread its meanders in a slow, measured rhythm, winding toward the center. And when he reached it, he would take a ball, the pelota, and throw it to the others gathered around the path. They would throw it back, and the ball would pass back and forth in a kind of dance, following the rhythm of the winding road. It looked, to an outsider, like a game, but behind the impression of a game was an essential truth of the Christian faith, the resurrection. The journey into the dark center and the return back out into the light was death and rising again, walked and danced in stone. The same architecture as the very first story we told, Theseus descending into the labyrinth and following the path back into the light. Death at the center, return to the world, walked out every Easter by men in robes on a cathedral floor. And here is the strangest turn of all. This design is not a relic. In the 1990s, a revival began, led in part by Lauren Artress at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, and it is still spreading. Today, hospitals lay labyrinths into their gardens, prisons build them in their yards, schools paint them onto their grounds. A 3,500-year-old shape is being installed right now in modern institutions to reduce stress, to calm the mind, to help people heal. Which raises the obvious question: why does it work?
So let's do what the ancients never could. Let's measure it. When researchers study what actually happens to a person walking a labyrinth, they find a consistent shift in the nervous system. The body moves out of its stress state, the fight or flight sympathetic mode, and into the opposite, the parasympathetic state, rest and digest. Cortisol, the stress hormone, drops, the heart settles, the racing, churning quality of anxious thought quiets down. Studies of reflective labyrinth walking report measurable, relaxing, calming effects again and again. And the leading explanation for why is beautifully simple. Think about what the labyrinth forces your body to do. You are walking, your body is fully active, fully engaged, but the path is constantly turning. You reverse direction again and again and again, every few steps, the whole way in. And yet, and this is the key, you never have to make a single choice. There are no branches, no decisions, no problem to solve. Unlike a maze, which demands constant calculation, the labyrinth demands none. So you get a state almost impossible to reach any other way. An active body and a problem-solving mind with absolutely nothing to solve. Researchers have called it engaged rest, measurably different from walking in a straight line and measurably different from working through a maze. The body is occupied just enough to let the conscious, calculating mind let go. The labyrinth, it turns out, is not a puzzle. It is a machine, a piece of technology built from nothing but a path for changing the state of the human brain.
And that, finally, is where the impossible pattern starts to make sense. Because if the labyrinth produces a real, measurable effect on the human nervous system, and if that effect does not depend on your language or your gods or your century, if it works the same way in a Roman bath, an Arizona desert, and a hospital garden, then think about what follows. Any culture, anywhere, that experiments with walking and with simple geometric line, and the 7-circuit design grows out of a seed so simple a child can draw it, a cross and 4 dots and 4 corners. Any such culture could stumble onto the same shape, walk it, feel the same calm settle over the mind, and keep it, not because the drawing traveled, but because the human nervous system is the same everywhere, and the shape that quiets it is the same everywhere. There is a name for this in biology, the eye. The eye is so useful that evolution did not invent it once and pass it around. It invented the eye independently, from scratch, dozens of separate times, in creatures with no common-eyed ancestor. The solution kept appearing because the problem kept appearing, and there are only so many ways to solve it. The labyrinth may be the eye of human culture, not one invention that spread across the world, but the same solution found over and over by separate peoples answering the same need, because the human mind is built the way it is built. The basket and the coin are identical not because they touched, but because we are.
And yet, no one can prove it. The honest answer, the one the world's leading labyrinth scholars will give you, is that we do not know. It might be very ancient diffusion, a single origin so old it predates every record we could ever find, carried on routes long since erased. Or it might be independent invention, the same shape discovered again and again by the human mind. No one has closed the case. The labyrinth remains one of the strongest examples we have of either possibility, and a verdict on which one is true does not exist. But sit with what the second answer would mean. If 5 isolated cultures on 5 continents that never touched, each invented this exact winding path on their own, Crete and the Baltic, Arizona and Tamil Nadu and the Australian outback, then the shape was never really out there in the world at all. It was inside us, a pattern carved into the way the human mind processes space and movement and meaning. We did not learn the labyrinth from each other, we recognized it. Each culture that drew it was not copying a neighbor, it was reading something already written, in the same place, in every one of us. We were already carrying it. Which leaves one last door standing open. If a figure this specific can be coded into all of us, waiting in every culture to be drawn, then what else is in there? What other shapes are written into the architecture of the human mind, surfacing again and again in people who never met, that we simply haven't learned to recognize yet? The basket and the coin are the same drawing. Walk far enough into that mystery, and you arrive at the center, and find that it was never really about labyrinths at all. It was about the shape of the thing that drew them.